Sports for Real with Coach Hall. I just got through watching a Pivot episode that just released, with Channing Crowder, Ryan Clark, and Fred Taylor, and this time they were interviewing Don Staley. Real good interview, covered a lot of topics, but the one thing I want to talk about is the officiating. She made reference to the officiating and how it built up to a situation where it possibly could have gone against her team in the Final Four. That can be debated either way. But one thing that can be debated is the effect that officiating does have on basketball games, not just women's college basketball, on all levels. All it takes is one bad call or one terrible missed call to change the whole direction of the game. Though the worst call I think I ever seen before this Euro step came in the game, when all this awful traveling is taking place now, was it was back in the 90s when the Knicks were going at it with the Heat. And that's when I think Pat Riley was the coach. And they were playing in Game 5. And I think Dan Marley was guarding, I think his name, Chris Childs. And, they were about a good 2-3 feet apart. And all Marley did was raise his hands and back up. Didn't get no closer than a yard to the man, and the man called a foul. That call turned that whole game, and eventually led to the Knicks winning that series. I can understand if there was some kind of contact, but the man wasn't even close enough to make contact. So when you start talking about officiating, these kind of things happen. And you think it's bad in NCAA women's basketball. I used to coach girls high school basketball. I remember one time we went to this rural county, and high school basketball is only 8-minute quarters. So what's that? 32 minutes. We had about 50 fouls between both teams. I got to the point where I had to substitute offense for defense because my best offensive players had all the fouls. So I had to shovel in some people to try to play defense. And as soon as they called another foul because you knew it was coming, I substituted again. We escaped that night, but there's no earthly reason in the world why there should be 50 fouls in a basketball game. That's just the referees overstepping their position. Let the people play, and if there's an egregious foul or something obvious that you have to call, then you make the call. But you don't control the whole game by calling all these different fouls. Now, one thing that Staley was referring to, it kind of gets into the head of the officiating, and when people start talking about it and everybody's repeating it, now you got the officials that are looking for it, and it gets into the head of the officials, and then they can start calling some fouls that normally wouldn't be called. Yes, South Carolina had some bad calls against them, and I don't think that was the reason why they lost the game. There's some errors that they made that cost them that game, but it was played a big factor. And then in the championship game, that turned around on Iowa. They started getting into foul trouble, and that played a big part in their demise. But another thing that she said that was very important, 2 of the officials in the championship game were black. All the attention went to the referees in the championship game, not the semifinals, which means that these referees are going to be hampered from getting big-time opportunities to ref in a championship game again. I hadn't thought about that up to that point that she said that, but there's a lot of truth in that. Scrutiny is everywhere, and they don't want that to happen again, and we don't want the spotlight to go on the officials, so we're going to blackball these officials from getting into big-time situations again because we don't want them to ruin it. But at the same time, nobody said anything about the officiating from the semifinals. So that's just something to think about. Officiating in basketball has always been horrible, and it takes too much weight in the game that could turn the tide. Now, other sports, officiating also plays a big part, but by contrast in football, referee really can't save you. If it's 4th down and goal on the 1, referee can't save you. But if it's 3 seconds on the clock and you take a shot and miss, the referee can call a foul and put you on the line. So Dwayne Wade in Game 5, I think it was against the Dallas, hit the free throw with like a 1/10 of a second left on the clock. Ridiculous. The referees won that game. Now, by contrast, when you start talking about football, I've seen the same thing twice this year, especially in Kansas City's favor. They got two horrible calls in the AFC Championship game and in the Super Bowl that allowed them to cart the trophy off. But despite that, there's nothing worse than basketball officiating, especially with the way that the game can change based on the call that's made. So just something to think about. Sports for real.